Hello, it's Amy, and I am extremely late to the party on 84 Charing Cross Road. This is a book that was published in 1970, and over the last year and a half here in the booktube community, it's had a little bit of a resurgence. I've seen it appear on many channels, on many Instagrams, and I knew it was going to be right up my alley, but it wasn't until yesterday that I decided that I was going to finally, purchase it from my wish list and read it. And as you can see, it's just a slim little volume, but it's a volume of correspondence between author Helen or Helene. It could be Helene Hanff, uh, beginning in 1949 with a bookseller from England. Helene Hanff was an American author, and she spent many years of her life writing for American television. She wrote for Ellery Queen, which was a mystery series on TV in the 50s and into the 60s. And she ended up writing children's books, children's educational material. And then in 1970, she published this. I believe she has a memoir out there as well, but I didn't quite know what to expect. She began the correspondence, and let me just double check the exact date here. The first letter we have here is from October 5th of 1949, when Helene Hanff, who addresses the letter to gentlemen, not knowing who she's going to get, sends her first letter to Marks and Company at 84 Charing Cross Road in England. And I believe it's in London. So a bookshop in London. She is writing from New York City, so New York in the United States. And she sends off a letter inquiring about a book. Because she's been having trouble finding exactly what she wants stateside, and so she writes to England and begins this almost 20-year correspondence with some of the employees of this bookshop. Frank Dowell being her primary contact and the one she sends letters to the most. But she ends up writing to Frank's wife, to one of the neighbors, to a couple of the other employees. And it's this really, amusing and witty correspondence, especially on her part. And I can only imagine how Frank Dowell responded receiving her first few letters, because the first one included in here, it's fairly businesslike and professional, the kind of thing you would send to a bookshop that you're looking to buy from for the first time. The kind of thing you might send, a business email if you're looking to find out about a book that's being sold online these days. But quickly, and we don't know, or at least I don't know, how much of the correspondence is missing here. It's certainly not everything. It's kind of the highlights. But by the second letter included in this, collection, she takes this very humorous turn, and I can only imagine what Frank Dowell thought of that when he first read it. Because if you're, misreading the tone and don't realize they're taking a playful tone or witty tone, you might think that someone's a bit irate at not getting exactly what they desire. So, for instance, here she receives some books, or some titles anyway, and she knows what she owes in British pounds, but she's a little bit flustered with the fact that she has to do, as she calls, the translation of the currencies herself. And she says, "Will you please translate your prices hereafter? I don't add too well in plain American. I haven't a prayer of ever mastering bilingual arithmetic." And he ends sort of with a P.S. I hope Madame doesn't mean over there what it does here. And of course, Madame, I think in the American context, certainly calling someone a Madame kind of has almost a Lady of the Night sexual connotation to it, where certainly in England and in Canada as well, because we have the French influence, to me, Madame is just a way of saying lady. And that's kind of the first suggestion of the humorous attitude of her letters. But then I flagged a few here, some of my favorites I wanted to share, because it certainly turns away from, you know, that business writing to the kind of thing you might send to a friend, and they certainly did seem to be friends. And I think the saddest thing about this is I get to the end and I realize, oh, like the correspondence ended because Frank Doel passed on. He died in 1968. And there's kind of an epilogue, which is permission from the family to reprint his letters in this volume here, which was published in 1970. But so Helene was a bit of a recluse. She worked from home. She wrote her scripts from home, and she liked to do her reading at home. She doesn't seem to have wanted to or liked to wander far from her own apartment. Gotta say, I relate with that. And so she wanted these books delivered, and just as today, some of the things she received weren't always what she expected. And so we have a letter here from October 15th of 1951. No address, no like Dear Frank or anything like that. She just begins in capital letters with, "What kind of a Pepys diary do you call this? This is not Pepys' diary. This is some busybody editor's miserable collection of excerpts from Pepys' diary. May he rot. I could just spit. Where is January 12th, 1668, where his wife chased him out of the bed and round the bedroom with a red-hot poker? Where is Sir W. Penn's son that was giving everybody so much trouble with his Quaker notions? One mention does he get in this whole pseudo-book, and me from Philadelphia. I enclose 2 limp singles. I will make do with this thing till you find me a real Pepys. Then I will rip up this book page by page and wrap things in it." And that mention of ripping it up page by page and wrapping things in it is because there was an earlier letter where she kind of chastised him in the shop for sending some of her purchases wrapped in pages from another book. And Doel replied by saying, you know, don't worry, this was already a book that was like destined for the trash heap anyway, because the boards were missing and it was incomplete, and it was the kind of thing that no one would have paid anything for. But now she's threatening to do the same with her Pepys, and I quite understand her rage and discontent with finding out her Pepys is abridged, because that's one of the things I've yet to purchase, because I would like to read the entirety of Pepys' diary. And I've listened to what I think was the entirety on audiobook, but I don't yet own my own physical hard copy of it, because everything I seem to find, at least in modern reprints, seems to be abridged. Even the Everyman's Library edition, which is unfortunate. And I have seen them out there, the complete set, but I would have to purchase it secondhand, and I would have to purchase it for a fairly large sum of money. And so I'm kind of on the lookout for something affordable, a deal, perhaps something I find in person in a bookshop, rather than leaving it up to the fates of the internet to see what I click order on, if that's what I actually receive, because I don't really want to end up like Helene here. And so that was a fun one. And we pick up again with, I think it's the Pepys here. Yes, on September 18th of 1952. So that's a full over a year later that she finally gets her Sam Pepys, as she calls him. She abridges the name Samuel to Sam. And this was sent September 18th, 1952, when Frankie, as she's now started to call him, Frank Doel, was away on vacation, and she's thanking him for, or rather thanking the shop for the fact that the Samuel Pepys diary arrived while he was on vacation. She says, "Please thank whoever mailed him for me. He came a week ago, stepped out of 4 pages of some tabloid, 3 honest navy blue volumes of him. I read the tabloid over lunch and started Sam after dinner." And I do like the way that she talks about the books she receives as if they're, people that she's communing with. And it's such an interesting picture, too, to think of her reading kind of the wrapping that the books came in, because, that's still pretty common. You order a used book from somewhere and it'll occasionally be sent wrapped in pieces of a newspaper or magazine pages, which can be a little bit risky if it's going very far, if it's going to be exposed to elements, because sometimes that ink from that newsprint can transfer. But it's never occurred to me to sit down and read, the pages the books came wrapped in. But then she goes on to talk about Pepys and the diary as if, it's Sam Pepys himself who has showed up in her home. He says to tell you he's overjoyed to be here. He was previously owned by a slob who never even bothered to cut the pages. I'm wrecking them. It's the thinnest India paper I ever saw. We call it onion skin over here, and it's a good name for it. But heavier paper would have taken up 6 or 7 volumes, so I'm grateful for the India. I only have 3 bookshelves and very few books left to throw out. I house clean my books every spring and throw out those I'm never going to read again, like I throw out clothes I'm never going to wear again. It shocks everybody. My friends are peculiar about books. They read all the bestsellers, they get through them as fast as possible. I think they skip a lot and they never read anything a second time, so they don't remember a word of it a year later. But they are profoundly shocked to see me drop a book in the wastebasket or give it away. And a side note here, dropping a book in a wastebasket. That sounds horrifying, but sometimes that's all there's left to do. And I've occasionally recycled a book that has either fallen apart or has gotten so badly damaged or that came to be damaged. And, I'm looking at it and thinking, there's nothing more to be done. This has no resale value, even if I stick it in a little free library, like no one's going to want this. But there are people who are still horrified by that. And she's someone who culls her shelves. And I do that occasionally too, because for me, as her principal here, if I'm not going to pick it up and reread it, then it shouldn't be here. My library is kind of a living thing to access. It's not a graveyard. It should not be a graveyard or a tombstone of books. Now, I'll continue on here. The way they look at it, you buy a book, you read it, you put it on the shelf, you never open it again for the rest of your life, but you don't throw it out, not if it has a hardcover on it. Why not? I personally can't think of anything less sacrosanct than a bad book or even a mediocre book. Trust you and Nora had a fine holiday. And Nora is Frank's wife. Mine was spent in Central Park. I had a month's vacation from Joey, my dear little dentist. And she goes on to talk about some dental work she was having done and how unfortunately paying for that dental work once again prevented her from using her savings for the long-awaited trip to London, England, where she was hoping to, one day meet Frank and meet Nora and meet the others in the bookshop. And it's kind of sad and bittersweet that she never made it while Frank was alive, that she never met all these people that she was corresponding with. But then she says, despite these financial hardships, I do not intend to stop buying books. However, you have to have something, she says. Will you see if you can find me Shaw's dramatic criticism, please, and also his music criticism? I think there are several volumes. Just send whatever you can find now. Listen, Frankie, it's going to be a long winter, and I babysit in the evenings, and I need reading matter. Now, don't start sitting around. Go find me some books. And those last few lines are in bold capital letters here. And so it's just these really amusing letters. And there's one more I wanted to share here, where you can definitely tell they built, a rapport that goes well beyond your typical, customer client relationship here. Once again, no address here, no dear Frank. Begins with sloth in capital letters. I could rot over here before you send me anything to read. I ought to run straight down to Brento's, which I would if anything I wanted was in print. You may add Walton's Lives to the list of books you aren't sending me. It's against my principles to buy a book I haven't read. It's like buying a dress you haven't tried on. Which, that's kind of funny because these days we do buy books we haven't read, and certainly we buy dresses we have not tried on. And two things that are not always wise to do when ordering from abroad. But she says, but you can't even get Walton's Lives in a library over here. You can look at it. They have it down at the 42nd Street branch, but not to take it home. And she's got home underlined here with an exclamation point because she seems very offended by the fact that she can't take this book home and read it. The lady said to me, shocked, eat it here. Just sit right down in room 315 and read the whole book without a cup of coffee, a cigarette, or air. And I can't imagine sitting in a library in a closed room with no windows and, no beverages allowed, trying to enjoy a book like that. Even in my student days, I would smuggle my coffee into the library. And to my credit, I never damaged a book. I never made a mess. But sometimes, when you're studying or just enjoying, you've got to have that beverage or that food with you because there's no way that you can go for 8-10 hours. And so she was not into that idea, clearly. And so she wants a copy of her own. And she says, doesn't matter. Q quoted enough of it, so I know I'll like it. Anything he liked, I'll like, except if it's fiction. I can never get interested in things that didn't happen to people who never lived. What do you do with yourself all day? Sit in the back of the store and read? Why don't you try selling a book to someone? Miss Hanff to you. I'm Helene only to my friends. P.S. Please tell the girls and Nora if all goes well. They're getting nylons for Lent. And so this is sort of the shift where Frank goes from writing, Miss Hanff to calling her Helene. And the reference to the nylons is the fact that she had been sending sort of care packages, gifts, to the employees of this shop. Because when she first started writing to them in 49 up until about somewhere in 53, England was still under the rationing system, which was sort of an after effect of the Second World War. And so she was sending them basic things like canned tongue, which sounds horrible, but I guess it was good and they appreciated it. Things like fresh eggs, powdered eggs, ham, meat, that sort of thing. And on one occasion, she managed to have someone drop off some pairs of nylons for Frank's wife, Nora, and for his daughters as well. And it's just this really delightful, enjoyable collection of correspondence that has just the right amount of book references combined with, you can see this really heartwarming relationship building. And I think that's why it kind of hits you really hard when you get to the end and realize that the final letters aren't from Frank at all, and rather they're from another employee of the shop who is writing to let her know that Frank passed on from appendicitis. And I think it took me way too long to pick this up. I wish I'd picked it up sooner. And it was just so wonderful to just sit on my sofa just now and read this all the way through. And I think it's something I'm going to be, gifting to all my friends, to my sister, to my mother, because I think it's something that they'd enjoy as well. And I will leave it right there.